Hi everybody. So one of the topics people often get a little bit confused about are exports, imports, export receipts, import payments, and the circular flow model. So here we go. So exports are simply all those goods and services that New Zealand producers sell to overseas buyers, and we earn income from those overseas buyers, and it comes back into New Zealand. So for example, in 2022, our top export was concentrated milk, and our top destination was China. And a lot of our exports are agricultural and they head overseas in these giant container ships, as you can see there. So those are the physical exports of goods going overseas or services. The money coming back into New Zealand are our export receipts. That could be the $6.99 billion earned for the milk. It could also include income earned from exported services, particularly pre-COVID, our biggest export receipt earner was actually tourism. Overseas tourists come to New Zealand, they change their overseas money for New Zealand money, and they spend it here for hotels and backpackers and going on tours. Those services are considered to be export receipts because they're overseas buyers buying those services. So here you see an example of all the goods and services, or sorry, goods that we are exporting. You can see how big a chunk the concentrated milk is. If you look across the top there, in fact, most of it, you can see how reliant we are on agricultural products, sheep and goat meat, wood, fruit, cheese, milk, butter. Way down in the corner are the other things, wine, or down the bottom, wine, aluminium, and some things like that. We're working on it, but we're still highly reliant on the agricultural sector. And in terms of countries, again, China, number one. You can see Australia there, United States, Japan, Korea are our biggest export destinations. Just another note about exported services. Rocket Lab is another example. I'd like to just give you an example of something that's not agricultural based. So they launched satellites into orbit from the Mahia Peninsula over towards Gisborne Way on the North Island. They also have a site in the US. They launch satellites into space. Those overseas companies who want those satellites up into space pay Rocket Lab for that service. That's an exported service. They generate export receipts. On the import side, imports are any goods or services we buy, New Zealand producers and consumers buy from overseas. In 2022, our top import was, possibly not a surprise, refined petroleum, otherwise known as petrol. Top origin for our imports was China. So you can see kind of a common denominator there, but refined petroleum. So our imported goods tend to be more of the manufactured sort of things, cars, petrol, things like that, that we can't produce here in a relatively small country like New Zealand. Import payments then are any of the money going from New Zealand consumers or firms overseas. So $5.4 billion on petrol, that's an import payment. New Zealand firms pay it to the overseas firms. The money is going out of here. Obviously, we as consumers also tend to buy a lot of goods online from companies like Amazon and Temu. Those payments are also import payments. They go overseas to our overseas suppliers, and that's an outflow, so therefore an imported payment. We also have imported services. Same deal, services provided to New Zealand producers or consumers by overseas companies. We are paying them for that service. The money is going out of the country for that. For example, when we ship our products overseas, most of those ships are overseas owned, so that producers are paying those shipping companies for that service. Those are import payments. And for us consumers, when we go overseas, pay for an Uber or accommodation or whatever, that would also be considered an imported service because we're using we're changing New Zealand money for overseas currency to pay for it. So just be clear on it. It really comes down to which way the money is going. If it's coming out of the country, it's an imported import payment. If the money's coming into the country, it's an export receipt. Again, in terms of our imports, guess where? China, Japan, Thailand, and so on. Germany is up there as well. The EU in general would be one of our biggest markets, but China number one. So again, common denominator for us. And then on the right-hand corner, Australia, number 2 export and import partner in terms of trade. So going to our circular flow model then, over on the right, we've got our producers and overseas sector. It's not perfect, the circular flow model. Obviously, some of us, our households, are importing things on their own, but the bulk of the transactions are between producers in New Zealand and producers overseas. So the export flow are the goods going overseas. The export receipts is the money flow coming back into New Zealand. Similarly, the import flow are the products coming from overseas into New Zealand, and the import payments is the money coming out of New Zealand into those overseas bank accounts to pay for them. So hopefully that provides some clarity. Circular flow is in NCEA level 2 and 3 for macro, so make sure you've got it sussed.